Last night, Britain was on fire. In the aftermath of a horrific stabbing in Belfast, riots took place across the UK. After the police initially incorrectly identified the attacker as Somali, we now know that a man who was believed to be from Sudan has been arrested for attempted murder. The police describe the incident as a brutal knife attack. Detectives are claiming this isn't a terror-related incident. The victim is believed to be suffering from serious knife wounds. Now, as you can see, there were heroic people who had stepped in to stop the violence. You can see there's 2 or 3 people and then the police get involved. According to the Home Office, the attacker was on leave to remain until 2028. He arrived in the UK in 2023 and was given refugee status that same year. But what transpired across the UK last night was not concerned citizens. What we saw was a pogrom. Rioters in Belfast began committing arson with innocent people's homes set alight. It is believed that rioters were targeting homes they thought belonged to immigrants. This next video shows a group of thugs vandalizing a home.
Oh. Yeah, it's terrible. It's actually terrible.
Holy shit, that's scary. Yo, we're checking the cars, mate. What the fuck? What the see this? Don't like it a video. Yo, they're fucking checking if they were fucking that.
A bus was also set alight. Sky News reported on the aftermath, showing one of the houses that had been burned down.
Let's have a look inside here. If you bear with us as we just come through here, you can just imagine the scene last night. A family sitting in there, watching television, enjoying their evening, when this happened, when the angry mob descended on the building here and attacked them. And this is the exact position where the Sky News camera in the helicopter was above and spotted people coming out of there. You can see the celebrations just there in the distance. Forgive the language potentially that you're maybe seeing. 40th birthday celebrations, clothes hanging on the banister there in the staircase.
Far-right agitators were also seen in Scotland. In this video, racial slurs were shouted at a black man who was seemingly being chased, warning this footage may cause distress.
Fucking day! Fucking day!
In Liverpool, we reported on the grounds where a small far-right gathering took place. It was reported that someone shouted, torched the hotels. Then people made their way to a hotel they believed housed asylum seekers, with some targeting delivery drivers. We also have some footage of riot police turning up.
Kinds of protests, or is it just kind of...
Of course, the far-right agitators who created the conditions for the riots are trying to pass on the blame. They believe it is the government that is causing the chaos and not a slew of far-right propaganda from paid agitators to corners of the corporate media. In response to Keir Starmer condemning the attack, Tommy Robinson tweeted this: "Stop importing the fuckers then. Send them back. Stop dumping these third world savages into our communities. Enough of your performative politics, you wanker." It's that exact rhetoric that has caused these riots. Listen to the language. Third world savages being dumped into our communities. Robinson is calling immigrants savages. The Sudanese suspect is a disgusting thug, of course. But it's far-right agitators who are using a narrative that all Somalis, Sudanese, Afghans are subhuman. In his very response, he is proving what a vile racist he is. If an American or Australian committed such crimes, would he be using this language? And for those that say, well, they don't commit those crimes here, so maybe it proves that certain immigrants from certain places are savages. Well, we obviously don't have many US or Australian migrants because it's a very far-away country. But look at the level of violence in the US. Reform's Zia Youssef tweeted, "Some cultures are much better than others." So Zia is resorting to a horrendous dog whistle. I mean, I suppose the culture of setting innocent people's homes on fire, where children had to be rescued because you're a disgusting racist, is an inferior culture. But we know Zia doesn't mean those people. I wonder why Tommy Robinson, Rupert Lowe, and Reform ignore certain crimes from certain people. Now, we as a left-wing channel are covering this story. The left doesn't ignore crimes when committed by asylum seekers or immigrants, yet the right and the far right sure do ignore crimes when it doesn't suit their narrative. In 2024, a white man tried to behead his female partner. Nothing from Patrick Christie's condemning white men trying to behead people then either. See that? Absolute silence. What about this one? A white man who was high on cocaine murdered a Saudi student. Or what about this one? Neo-Nazi obsessed teen jailed for trying to kill Kurdish man in Bristol with an axe. That was a 19-year-old. We do have a culture issue, a culture of extremism, a culture of violence, but it doesn't cross racial or religious lines. It's men. Regardless of which country, men are committing these crimes. Now, are men inherently bad? No. We have a system that doesn't just punish women, it punishes men too. We have a mental health crisis, and men are big victims of it. With the slashing of mental health services, do you think that's going to bear no connection to isolation, loneliness, radicalism, and ultimately violence? Regardless of where you're from, what religion or race, we're all human with the same brain, right, who responds in the same way to conditions we surround ourselves in. Blaming all immigrants and kicking them out will solve nothing. People like Tommy Robinson will find another group to exploit. He'll go after the white working class, just like every other right-winger when they're finished with migrants. Joining me now is Callum Taylor, who was on the ground in Liverpool. Callum, so you were there taking pictures and videos. Can you tell me what happened last night?
It was a complete and utter shit show. That's what happened last night, Curtis. So I turned up to St George's Hall, where Tommy Robinson had told his Twitter followers the Liverpool rally would be, and there was probably about maybe about 100, maybe 150 tops people there with flags, and it started out as like a normal gathering. You know, someone had a megaphone. They got one by one, did some speeches, talked about how terrible it is being a white man and all that, and that was when somebody shouted, "Touch the hotels," and then somebody else had the idea, let's go to one of these asylum hotels, shouted through the megaphone, pointed everyone in the direction of it, and then what ensued was a march to a hotel round the corner that has it is a place that is known to be housing asylum seekers in Liverpool. There have been protests outside that hotel before, and once the crowd got there, a small number of the group thought it would be a brilliant idea to try and get inside the hotel, and they tried to storm the entrance, at which point police obviously stopped them, and even more police showed up. It was the usual chanting, send them back, stop the boats. When more police turned up, they all started chanting, I can't breathe, at the police. The police were being booed. Anyone that walked past that wasn't with the group who wasn't white was having abuse shouted at them. And then eventually the crowd got bored. I actually bobbed out for a couple of minutes, and when I came back, everyone had disappeared, and they decided to go and try and find another asylum hotel. Well, they seemingly got lost and ended up gathering at the bottom of Bold Street, which is one of the streets in Liverpool that has quite a lot of restaurants. And also at that point is where the Just Eat and the delivery workers are. Everyone watching probably knows there's usually a place somewhere in your town or your city where the delivery drivers hang out in between orders. It's normally like a central place where they can get easily to any of the restaurants or the fast food chains or whatever that they're delivering food from. And the crowd decided to start verbally attacking those men because they're not white. One woman was screaming, accusing one fella of having inappropriate images of children on his phone with no evidence at all, purely just the fact that he was a black man. They were shouting again, send them back. They were shouting, chanting a sing-song chant about get back on your dinghies and fuck off. It was just quite nasty shit. And there was a moment where there was a couple, youngish couple, maybe sort of early to mid-20s, sort of came up next to me. And the woman sort of asked me what was going on. She thought it was football, and her English wasn't the best, so she used Google Translate to try and communicate with me. I tried to explain to her what was going on and she didn't understand. So she got her phone out, got up Google Translate and handed me a phone. And I literally just put the word racists, handed her it back. She looked at me, looked at the crowd, realised what was going on, started typing, hands me the phone back. And the message that I get back from her is, do you think we need to escape from this place? And I looked her in the eyes and I thought for a minute and I just went, yeah, probably. Like, for your own safety. It was heartbreaking, absolutely fucking heartbreaking. So her and a partner, they sort of just disappeared and they left. But while this was going on, the crowd was still shouting abuse at the delivery workers. Some people even grabbed the bags and were grabbing the bags off them, throwing them to the ground, to try and intimidate them. And yeah, it was just a mess. And then the footage that you showed earlier that I filmed where all the riot police turned up at that point, that was after they'd been harassing the Just Eat and the delivery workers, and then they decided that they were going to go back to St George's Hall. And once they got back there and they were sat on the steps, every time somebody walked past that wasn't white, they were shouting abuse at them. One young lad, probably only a teenager, walked past with someone that I assume was his girlfriend. They were holding hands and they started shouting abuse at them, accusing them of being cousins or being sisters, because apparently that's what you sort of people do. It was just horrendous. But I've been out on the streets, and we do this. We cover things like this a lot, and I've been to some of these protests. I've been outside the asylum hotels. I've been to the the Great British protests, Great British Strike protests, and I've seen the racism sort of thrown out into the world. I've seen them chanting, "Who the fuck is Allah?" Right? What I hadn't seen until last night was them doing that in a way that was targeted. When people were walking past that were not white, that may or may not have been Muslim, they all started chanting, "Who the fuck is Allah?" in the direction of the person that was walking past. When they saw the delivery drivers on the push bikes, they immediately started attacking them. Some of them were accusing them of being here in the country illegally. They don't know what the immigration status is of these people. They don't have a fucking clue what the immigration status is of these people. But because they're not white, they're an easy target. So, yeah, one of the people that was actually filming, that was in the crowd, put something out on Twitter where he'd recorded part of that incident, and he'd basically said, in relation to the alleged victim in the case in Ireland, that he doesn't even know whether he's Muslim, but he blames the Muslims anyway because he probably is. So he's going to blame the Muslims. This was one of the guys that was out in the crowd in Liverpool last night, and I think it's really, really important that people know that this was going on all over the country. There was horrific scenes in Glasgow. We know there was marches of people out on the streets in Manchester and other places as well. And this all came about because Tommy Robinson shared what appears to be an AI-generated list of cities across the country, telling them all to come out and cause havoc at 7 p.m. And that's exactly what they did. But a lot of the mainstream media are not reporting on, don't get me wrong, obviously what happens in Belfast was horrific. Like, we didn't see scenes like that, to my knowledge, anywhere else. But the mainstream media seem to just be focusing on Belfast, and it's almost like, oh, well, it's Northern Ireland's problem. Like, that's not happening here. You know, I was listening to LBC this afternoon, and somebody phoned into Sheila Ferguson's show and said, look, this is what was going on in Glasgow, and explained similar experience to what I saw in Liverpool last night. And she was like, "Oh, I didn't know. Oh, I didn't know that was going on in Glasgow." And it's like, how the fuck have you missed it? It was going on in every major city up and down the country last night. We've got a huge fucking problem where racists feel emboldened to go out on the streets and attack people, in some cases physically, like what we saw in some of the footage that we've shared earlier, what Eyewitness last night verbally, on the streets, in public with other people around, simply because of the colour of their skin. It's horrific.
It's awful. Thank you, Callum, for that. Let's bring in Harry. Harry, what are your thoughts on last night's riots? I mean, there were riots, but there were further than that. There were pogroms. There were homes being burnt down. You saw the footage of people hunting down certain people's houses, thinking they might be migrants and throwing stones at it. Let me get your thoughts on this.
I don't really know where to begin, to be honest. I think it doesn't really surprise me anymore. And I feel probably a lot of people feel that way. I'm no longer surprised now when a horrific crime is committed by an immigrant or a person of color, and then we see the scenes that we saw yesterday in Belfast, in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and obviously in Liverpool, as Callum was covering. It no longer surprises me, and I think you can't call it anything but racism, the responses that you see. When Paul Doyle in Liverpool, during Liverpool's title parade last year, drove his car into a crowd of people using it as a battering ram, there were no calls for sort of collective retaliation against white people or people who fit Paul's description. Likewise, the guy, I think it was earlier this week or maybe last week, who had stabbed a Saudi Arabian man. There were no calls for collective retaliation. But in this case, obviously, there have been, and the online agitators that you see, they know what they're doing. Farage and Reform UK in particular. We kind of expect this from your Stephen Yaxley Lennons of the world. But with Farage, he's always been sort of on the sidelines. He's always done the whole, I'm just asking questions gimmick that we obviously saw with Southport back in 2024. And obviously in the wake of the Henry Novak murder, He was telling people to show nothing but pure cold rage, and we saw that pure cold rage on the streets of Southampton. And again, similar with what we saw in Belfast last night, and obviously in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and I think there was another Scottish city as well. Um, there needs to be accountability. I think that's the main thing, because now people have kind of seen that they're testing the waters, and it's quite clear that the officials in charge, they can get away with this sort of stuff. They can get away with encouraging people to be angry in this way. The thing that's always really annoyed me is the whole legitimate concerns thing. Because there are plenty of things I'm legitimately concerned about, but you don't see me vandalizing properties, committing arson attacks, setting up road checks, checking for people's ethnicity to decide whether I'm going to let them through or not. It's disgusting. It's sickening. And we talk a lot in this country about never again, stuff like that. And yet we're seeing the very scenes repeating themselves here in this country. And it's terrifying. I think the response from the government, pretty lackluster. There was more collective outrage from the British political media class over 4 ambulances getting set on fire than there has been over what's happened in Belfast, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. And I think it's when we talk about the hierarchy of racism, and I think we're seeing it in full effect at the moment. And it honestly just makes me sad. Like, even now that I'm talking about now, I'm getting emotional. It is honestly, like, it's scary. It's genuinely scary. And I know that as a white person, I'm pretty safe. But who honestly knows? Doesn't bear thinking about, obviously.
I mean, I share your feelings. I don't usually let things get to me. I think, to be honest, watching a live stream genocide, it's really made me quite numb. I remember at the beginning of the genocide, I was tearing up whenever I saw footage. Now it's hardened me. So anything that happens, and especially being on Twitter, seeing the kind of rhetoric, it kind of numbs me to it. But last night, I felt quite overwhelmed. And I think the reason why I felt overwhelmed was, I could probably handle it if it was just domestic right-wingers, if it was just Tommy Robinson and Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. But ultimately, what underpins it all is Elon Musk and global oligarchs getting involved. And I felt like a sense of powerless. If it's domestic people, we can fight them on the streets. We can absolutely do that. But what made me feel powerless was the fact that we've got an entire Twitter platform owned by one madman, white supremacist madman, who was funneling money into right-wing projects. So that, I'm not gonna lie, it gets me. A recent development, Robert Jenrick from Reform announced that they're gonna, if they're in government, they're gonna ban all visas to Sudan or people coming from Sudan, quickly followed by Restore. These people would say, oh, you call everyone far right. But they're now, Nigel Farage cannot say I'm just asking questions when his party and Restore are literally saying we're now going to ban an entire people's or an entire country for the crime of one person. I want to get your thoughts on that.
To remember about Robert Jenrick in particular is that he was immigration minister when this
literally
visa status was approved. And again, I think this is the case with a lot of ex-Tories joining Reform UK. Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Andrew Rosendale. There's probably some others. Lee Anderson, obviously, famously. They're all part of the government that for 14 years trashed the public sector, trashed public services, deliberately underfunded the asylum system. So there's this backlog that exists, and we know why. We all know it's intentional, because these situations allow government, politicians, whoever, to deflect from their wider failings. And it's the only thing that sort of gives me hope with Reform, in the sense, is that there's so many egos within that party, it's destined to come down. And the only thing really holding them together is Farage, obviously. You take Farage out, there's so many egos within that party, they would all clash and fight. You can't have so many big names. But it is, I think, again, just the way that they are able to, it's the kind of things that they're saying, completely unthinkable. Even like during the height of Brexit, for example, where we kind of saw a lot of this sort of rhetoric get normalized, there was still like oh, you can't say that. And now it's very much like gloves are off. You know, it is perfectly okay to say we're going to deport entire groups of people. The whole remigration thing. You know, it would not surprise me in the next couple years if you see Nigel Farage stand up and start talking about great replacement. It
No.
honestly would not surprise me. And that's really depressing that we're no longer really sort of surprised about these things. And again, I kind of reiterate this whole idea that we talk about, you know, never again and stuff like that. And yet we're seeing it again. This time, obviously, in with our own eyes, instead of reading it off the pages of a book or watching it on TV. We can actually now turn on our TVs and we can see this sort of stuff. Regarding your point about, you know, Musk and whatever, I think there are genuine questions. I think Labour probably won't use stuff like the Online Safety Act, for example, to kind of shut down Twitter access in the UK because they kind of see how important it is. And that's also important to say that Twitter hasn't had its benefits, particularly in covering the genocide in Gaza, for example. One of the reasons I think this time round Israel has really lost the PR war is because of social media platforms like Twitter, where people have been able in real time to share footage of what's going on, and it's completely counter the mainstream media narrative. Again, with the actions of Israel in Amsterdam, for example, back in 2024, with the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, for example, it was that boots on the ground journalism covering on Twitter, for example, that was able to change people's perspectives on these things. But it's undeniable that these platforms are amplifying far right voices and creating a narrative that, quite frankly, does not need to exist. And it is very scary. It is very, very scary.
No, I take your point about Twitter. It's overwhelmingly right wing, but there has been real success in getting the message out there in terms of Gaza. That's a very good point. It's also worth saying that we're going through a dark period, but the numbers are on our side. Majority of people do not agree with these riots.
Yeah, I think what is also important to remember, though, is that obviously when the pogroms were going on back in 2024, after in the wake of the Southport murders, sorry, when I believe it was on the Monday or the Tuesday after the weekend that we'd had, where everything had been kicking off, when basically locals around the area basically sort of came out and said we're not gonna stand for this. And I think do it once, we can easily do it again. And in the end, there is probably more of us than there are them. People don't want to align themselves with those sort of groups when it's so public.